In this video we're going to look at assignment settings. So to find those we go to Management and we go into Assignments. Now there's a whole load of things in here, but most of them you don't need to be too concerned about. You can actually have multiple assignments, but generally the way that we tend to use them in Plymouth is we have a workspace set up for a cohort for that year, and generally they've just got one assignment, which is often a workbook, which they complete during the year. If you've got a more complex scenario, it's probably worth having a conversation with one of our team to sort of discuss and show you how you can do it. So if we look through the settings, we can see by default we've got member initiated submissions. So what this actually means is the students are going to take a workbook, and when they take it and save it, it's automatically submitted to the workspace. Generally that's the only option we tend to need here. Now this next section gives us a range of options for deadlines. There's a little eye icon which gives you different information. So the first date here is the start date for when students can begin to submit. If you want to clear any of the dates, there's a little icon to the right which you can click, and that will clear it like in these fields below. Now the second one is basically a sort of cut-off point for work, and as you can see from this description, if this deadline has passed, the students cannot submit. This third option allows you to sort of manage late submissions, so it'll just basically provide a flag if something is submitted after this date, but the students aren't normally able to see that. And this final option basically controls whether work can be modified after the deadline. So moving down, the next important thing to consider is the number of submissions per user. Usually we recommend setting this to 1. If your students are using a workbook, you only want them really to take one copy, because sometimes they can take more than one copy accidentally if this is set to anything more than 1. So we normally set that to 1. And then below here you can actually place some sort of restrictions on what can be accepted. If I click on restrict submissions to specific asset types, you can actually control what you'll allow students to submit. If you want your students to simply complete a workbook, then you don't really need to worry too much about this, because by default they're only allowed to submit one item and they'll open it and save it automatically. However, if you're using your workspace in a different way and you want your students to create, for example, experiences, reflections, and submit them, you might want to come into here and just say, oh, I only want them to complete these 2 types. But generally we just leave it on accept all types of assets and set it to 1. Again, there's a couple of other options here. Allow auto submit resources. Leave this checked, because if they take a workbook, then by default we want them to save it and automatically submit it. That's important. This allow direct file uploads is not something you need to be concerned about. Just down the bottom we've got submission locking. So it depends how you're using it, but generally this isn't something we use, but you can use this option to lock the work once it's been submitted. Generally the way we use PebblePad in Plymouth, this isn't something we do, because the way we like to have it is that students can complete work and then receive sort of formative feedback as they're going along, and then at the end of the sort of period they'll get summative feedback. So when we're happy with all these settings, click Save.